Too many similarities for the question not to be asked and for you not to say why.
No comment.
No comment.
On March 21st, 2002, 13-year-old schoolgirl Millie Dowler disappeared while walking home in Surrey, England. A desperate search was launched to bring her home to her family until some mushroom pickers made a gruesome discovery in Yateley Heath Woods. This was now a murder investigation, but it would be years until we knew what really happened to Millie and who was responsible. Amanda Jane Dowler, known as Millie, was born on June 25, 1988, to parents Sally and Bob Dowler. Millie grew up alongside her older sister, Gemma. The pair was very close and enjoyed spending quality time together. Her family members described Millie as a generous and kind soul. She made others smile and worked hard at everything she did, including playing the saxophone. She was extroverted and bright, the type of girl who could talk for hours and not get tired. Most importantly, Millie was loved deeply by those who knew her. On Thursday, March 21st, 2002, 13-year-old Millie spent her day at Heathside School in Weybridge. It was an ordinary day of classes, and once school ended, Millie set off with her friend Danielle to walk to the station and catch a train home. They left the school grounds at 3:05 p.m., and Danielle later recalled that everything seemed normal with Millie. Nothing about her behavior stood out as unusual. When they reached Danielle's stop, Millie decided to get off with her friend so they could grab something to eat at the station's cafe and keep catching up. Millie would usually get off at the next stop, but it was easy enough for her to walk home from there. Millie was a responsible girl for her age, and upon finding out that neither she nor Danielle had enough credits on their phones to call her dad, Millie borrowed someone's phone to let him know she would be back slightly later than usual. Danielle left at 4 p.m., and Millie set off on her route. She walked down Station Avenue, heading away from the cafe. She was sighted soon after at 4:08 p.m. by one of Gemma's friends. She had been waiting to catch the bus when she spotted Millie striding down the road.
I was just there waiting for my bus, and Millie was walking on the other side of the road, and it must have been within 30 seconds, maybe up to a minute, that my bus came round to pick me up. Looked out for her, and I didn't see her. At the time, obviously didn't think too much of it, thought it was a bit strange.
At 5 p.m., Gemma got home and discovered Millie wasn't back yet. She asked her dad about it, and he replied that he thought Gemma was going to meet Millie on her way home. As they looked at each other, each of them recalled a deep, twisting feeling in their gut. Something was wrong. This behavior was not common for Millie, and when she still had not returned home by 7 p.m., Millie's family notified the authorities. They immediately took the case seriously, assembling a search and investigation team and making sure residents in the area were aware to be keeping an eye out for Millie. News spread fast through the quiet village, with many people coming forward to volunteer in the search. As the sun rose on March 22nd, the investigation entered into its first day. The authorities were utilizing every resource available to them in the hope that this rapid response would bring Millie home. However, the days soon melted into each other, with leads few and far between. On March 23rd, Bob and Sally made a public appeal for any information that could help them bring Millie home.
Within the last hour, the parents of the missing 13-year-old schoolgirl Amanda Dowler have made a public appeal for help in finding her.
Unbelievable. We're devastated. We're just so desperately worried, and we just want to have Millie back home with us so much.
By now, the news had reached national headlines, with practically every news channel airing Millie's story, showing her face to the nation. BBC's famous show Crime Watch aired a reconstruction of Millie's last known movements. Once again, Bob and Sally gave a statement and asked that anyone who knew anything at all, no matter how insignificant they think it might be, to come forward.
I'd say if someone has taken Millie and is holding her, then please, please give her back to us. You can't believe the enormous grief it's caused the family and her friends and everybody that knows her. It's just been absolutely awful. We're absolutely devastated.
This significant media coverage meant that the police were flooded with tips from the public. In fact, in just 2 weeks, roughly 4,000 calls had come from members of the public who thought they might have useful information. Sightings came in from across the country from people who were certain they had spotted Millie. The investigators did their best to follow up on these, but ultimately, none of them were confirmed. Before they knew it, days had turned into weeks, and those weeks into months, and in June, the Surrey police spoke with the Dowlers and began bracing them for the worst-case scenario. After this amount of time, the chances of finding Millie alive were almost non-existent. Bob and Sally couldn't bear to face the thought. Giving up that hope was like losing Millie all over again, and they couldn't bring themselves to accept that possibility. The tragic reality was that this was something they would have to come to terms with a few months later. On September 18th, a couple was out in Yateley Heath Woods, foraging for mushrooms. Instead, they found something that would forever be scarred in their memories. While focusing on their task at hand, something caught their attention out of the corner of their eye. They rushed back to their vehicle to notify the authorities, and while on the call, they mentioned it might be Millie Dowler. This highlights just how widely known her case was. Specialized teams were mobilized, and the investigators working on Millie's case were notified of the findings. An extensive examination began, with photos being taken of every inch of the scene and any possible evidence bagged for further analysis. Once this was completed, the remains were collected for a post-mortem examination. Millie's parents were told about the discovery, as the investigators didn't want them to find out any other way. However, due to the level of decomposition, the coroner would need to compare Millie's dental records in order to determine whether it was her who had been found. Just 24 hours later, the news broke that it was Millie Dowler. There had been no identifying items with her in Yateley Heath Woods. To this day, Millie's school uniform, cell phone, and backpack have never been found. Although the authorities had warned Millie's family of the worst possibility being an increased likelihood months previous, her case had still been classed as an endangered missing person. Now, it was marked as a homicide investigation. Experts determined that she had been there since the week of her disappearance, meaning Millie was not kept alive for very long. With the hunt still on for a prime suspect, the authorities shifted their focus to someone very close to Millie, her own father. When Bob was initially questioned about his daughter's disappearance in the early days of the investigation, it was obviously still a tough pill to swallow. Still, he understood the necessary process of finding his daughter. However, Bob Dowler had nothing to do with Millie's disappearance, and when his interest in him continued, his frustration grew. Bob knew that even a second spent on him meant that the real person was getting further away, and as the months passed, he was less likely to be brought to justice. But what reason did the investigators have that pointed to Bob's potential involvement in the first place? It all started back in the first month after Millie disappeared. A full-scale search of the home was carried out, with particular attention paid to Millie's room. They hoped something she had written or messaged someone could maybe point them in the right direction. One of the things they found was a handful of poems and notes written by Millie in the months leading up to her disappearance. They mentioned clashes she was having with her father, but it was nothing more than a young girl venting. Children arguing with their parents isn't exactly an uncommon occurrence. Even before Millie's body had been recovered, the Dowlers were living through a real-life nightmare in every sense of the word. They had intense media attention that often overstepped the boundaries, with journalists and photographers camped outside their homes, desperate to get their own piece of content. This meant that the family spent much of their time shut in, keeping the curtains drawn and too afraid to go outside and be swarmed by those who were waiting for them. It highlighted the dark side of the media, suffocating a family who were already at their breaking point. But it was about to get far worse. In 2011, shocking news broke that Millie's voicemail messages had been intercepted and deleted by journalists working for News of the World, a British newspaper. It turned out this had been one of the main reasons Dowler believed Millie was still alive, as all they and the authorities saw was that there had been activity on her phone.
First of all, you tell us that you were phoning in to Millie's voicemail.
Yes.
Quite regularly, presumably,
Yeah.
to see whether there was anything else there.
Yeah. Of course, all the time. At first we were able to leave messages, and then her voicemail became full.
Yes.
And then you rang, and then you just got the recorded. We are unable to leave messages at the moment.
The public was immensely angered by the news, and it raised an entire debate about the general media and the ethics behind their news coverage. It also shone a light on what lengths journalists will go to get a story. Naturally, once the story broke, it sparked further investigations into these practices, which only further exposed a string of illegal phone hacking operations. Finding the remains of a victim can mark a turning point in an investigation. Often, crime scenes or dumping sites offer many new clues to what happened, and this, in turn, can point to the perpetrator. However, in Millie's case, almost 2 years had passed with no new major leads. They seemed no closer to finding out who was responsible and were left to deal with the thought of that person living their life and potentially harming other individuals. Then, there was a breakthrough. DCI Colin Sutton, an officer from Surrey, transferred to London's Met Police, and he had been looking into a string of violent attacks and murders. While trying to solve these cases, a person of interest was identified. His name was Levi Belfield. When DCI Sutton started looking into Levi's history, he found something shocking. At the time of Millie's disappearance, Levi had lived just 50 yards from where she was last seen. After seeing this, DCI Sutton placed a call to a senior investigating officer with Surrey Police. He began telling the officer about Levi, what he was being investigated for, and how he lived so close to where Millie had vanished. As the senior investigating officer listened, the hairs stood up on the back of his neck. Something deep down was telling him that this was their guy. Levi Belfield was born on May 17, 1968, in Isleworth, London. As a child, he was given the surname Rabbets, but he later changed it to Belfield, his mother's maiden name. While he was still growing up, Levi's father died after a tough battle with leukemia. That left his mom to raise Levi and his 4 siblings in a southwest London council estate. Levi showed early signs of worrying behavior. When he was still a teenager, Levi was charged with several crimes, aching and entering, and theft. Then, in 1990, 22-year-old Levi got into a physical altercation with a police officer, resulting in his second run-in with the law. By the time Levi was on the police's radar for the London attacks, he had fathered 11 children with 5 former partners. When these women were asked about their relationships, many of them described Levi in a similar light. He was initially charming and gentle, but that would soon change. The real Levi Belfield was anything but. He was a controlling and abusive partner who used the fact that he was much larger than these women as a way to exert power over them. DCI Sutton said the following of Levi: "When we started dealing with him, he came across as very jokey, like he's your best mate. But he's a cunning and violent individual. He can switch from being nice to being nasty instantly." But what were these attacks that led to Levi being linked to the Millie Dowler case? It first started on February 4, 2003, when 19-year-old Marcia McDonnell got off the 111 bus stop at Percy Road bus stop and started walking home to her flat in Hampton. Marcia had been out at a movie with friends before she headed home. Friends and family described Marcia as quiet and hardworking. She was a talented violinist and netball player who was taking a year off before starting university so she could travel. Marcia had her eyes set on Australia, but it was a dream she would never realize. Marcia was attacked just yards from her front door, caught by surprise and in a vulnerable position. A passerby found Marcia bleeding out at her front door. Emergency services were called, and Marcia was rushed to hospital, but the damage was too severe. 2 days later, she died from her injuries. Then came 18-year-old Kate Sheedy. It was May 28th, and Kate had just finished her last day at Gumley House Covent School. It was supposed to be a new start for the bright young woman who spent her final year as the school's head girl. To celebrate, Kate spent the evening at a karaoke bar with her close friends. She then got on the H22 bus heading back home to Isleworth, where she lived with her parents. Once she got off at her usual stop, it was a short walk home. It was a route she had taken countless times, but this night, something was different. As she strode along the sidewalk, Kate noticed a car parked along the road. It was idling, the engine running, although the lights had been turned off. This stuck out to Kate, and she decided to cross the road, not wanting to walk directly past the car. As she did so, the driver of the vehicle suddenly accelerated. Kate was the target, and it hit her. As Kate lay on the road, likely unsure of what had just happened, the driver then reversed over her again. They then sped off, leaving Kate for dead. Unable to walk, she dragged herself out of the road, terrified the person would come back to finish her off. Someone found her, and Kate was rushed to hospital. Her injuries were extensive. She spent weeks in hospital but was able to recover. While Kate's body began to heal, she was still finding her way through an immense mental battle. I remember, in the 3rd week, I was in hospital. I woke up and I cried. I cried for hours and hours, for days, at the thought that someone had tried to kill me, she told the Telegraph. 3 months after Kate was attacked, another woman crossed paths with a monster. Amélie Delagrange moved to England from a small French village, hoping to improve her English. Her parents, Dominique and Jean-François, said she was the happiest person and always had a smile on her face. She got her bachelor's degree in France before living in Spain for some time, and then she moved to Manchester. After Manchester, Amélie made London her home in April 2004. While she studied applied languages, Amélie spent her days working at a local bakery. It was there that she met Oliver L'Enfant. The pair hit it off and had a strong connection, partly due to their similar background. Amélie wasn't naive about being a woman living in London. She followed all the guidelines young women are told will keep them safe. She avoided walking anywhere alone, especially when it was dark. So, when Amélie finished up with friends at Twickenham's Crystal's wine bar on August 19th, she was reluctant to make the trip back alone at such a late hour. Thankfully, the walk to her home from her usual stop wasn't long. At 9:30 p.m., Amélie left Twickenham and got on the 267 bus. She then missed her stop, getting off at Fulwell Bus Garage. Amélie had no choice but to take the longer walk to her flat. As she disappeared down the street, Amélie had no idea who was lying in wait. 30 minutes after she boarded the bus, Amélie was found unconscious and bleeding. Like the other two, she was rushed to hospital, but the damage had already been done. Shortly after midnight on August 20th, Amélie Delagrange was pronounced dead. After Amélie's tragic attack and murder, locals provided investigators with several names of potentially violent individuals, one of whom was Levi Belfield. Upon questioning Levi, the investigators found him to be nonchalant and seemingly light-hearted about the situation. Despite the seriousness of the matter, he came across as jovial during the interview. Kate Sheedy offered a detailed description of the vehicle involved in her attempted murder, and it happened to match the one Levi was driving at the time. CCTV footage also showed this car following Kate's bus before stopping and launching the attack after she got off. As they began looking into the CCTV footage from Amélie and Marcia's routes, vehicles were also spotted following their buses, ones that belonged to Levi. By the end of 2004, investigators believed they had sufficient evidence to press charges against Levi. On November 22nd, he was arrested for the suspected murder of Amélie Delagrange. He remained in custody awaiting trial. In early 2006, he was charged with Amélie's murder, as well as the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy and Albanian woman Irma Dragoshi. In May of that year, he faced an additional charge for the murder of Marcia McDonnell. The walls were closing in on Levi, and he was looking at spending a lifetime behind bars. 8 months after being charged with Amelie's murder, Levi was questioned about Millie's case. He responded with no comment to each question about his possible involvement.
That's at the very beginning of the interview. Do you remember that?
No comment.
It's exactly what you said. No comment. Found that very interesting, and I'll tell you for why. You didn't deny it.
No comment.
You didn't say, it's not me.
No comment.
And at no stage over the last 2 days have you denied any involvement in these offences.
No comment.
Why is that, Levi?
No comment.
Why haven't you sat there and said, jumped up and down and shouted from the rooftops, you've got the wrong person?
No comment.
Did you get a kick out of being involved in these sort of inquiries?
No comment.
Do you think it's a macho type of thing to hear?
No.
Do you think it will help your notoriety?
No comment.
Do you honestly believe that your actions over the 21st and the 22nd of March 2002 are the actions of an innocent man?
No comment.
Then are you an innocent man?
No comment.
Because if you are, tell us.
No comment.
And give us that explanation for where you were and what you were doing.
No comment.
At this stage, the investigators didn't have anything to tie Levi to Millie's murder directly. The fact that he lived nearby was hardly enough to convict the man. They would need concrete evidence before they started to think about laying charges. Now, the focus was on tying Levi to the case if he was the one responsible. One of the first lines of inquiry was his ex-partners. Specifically, who was Levi dating when Millie disappeared? She was a woman called Emma Mills. The pair lived together in her flat on Collingwood Road with their children. However, after Millie's disappearance, Levi insists they pack up and leave. Emma remembered being confused by their sudden departure, but she didn't want to challenge Levi on it. When Emma was asked where Levi was on March 21, she couldn't account for his whereabouts. He had returned home in the evening, now wearing different clothes than what she had seen him leave. Then, at 3 to 4 a.m., Levi woke up and left the house. Levi Belfield's trial began on October 12, 2007, at the Old Bailey in London. He was charged with the murders of Marcia and Amelie, the attempted murder of Irma Dragoshi and Kate Sheedy, and the attempted kidnapping of an additional woman. The prosecutor for the case was Brian Altman, who didn't mince his words when it came to Levi. These women were targeted victims of a predatory man who stalked bus stops and bus routes in vehicles looking for young women to attack, he stated. One of Levi's former friends was called to the stand during the trial, and he testified about Levi's suicide attempt 6 days after Amelie was murdered. He had taken an overdose of antidepressants before his friend discovered him. "You don't know what I have done," Levi reportedly told him. Levi was admitted to a mental hospital but was discharged the following day. The trial wrapped up on February 5, 2008. Levi was found guilty of the murders of Amelie Delagrange and Marcia McDonnell and the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy. The other 2 charges were dismissed due to lack of evidence. Outside the courtroom, Kate addressed the media with a statement.
On the day I was attacked, I was celebrating about moving on to a new and exciting time in my life. All that hope and excitement was taken from me, and I thought my life had changed forever. The road to recovery has been long and hard. Both mentally and physically, there were times when I thought I would never get better. With this verdict, I can finally move on with my life.
It was after this conviction that the Surrey police announced Levi Belfield was their prime suspect in the abduction and murder of Millie Dowler. While trying to find any link between him and Millie, the investigators noticed a red Daewoo Nexia driving down the road at the time Millie was last seen. It was Emma Mills' car, Levi's then-girlfriend. Stupidly, Levi responded to a question from the Daily Mirror by saying, "There's not many red Daewoos floating about in Walton-on-Thames. So we've got to be realistic about it, but then I've got to be careful about how I answer these questions. I did use the Daewoo once, and I was stopped by the police once in it for speeding. This car has never been found. Levi was charged with Millie's murder in March 2010. His trial began on May 10, 2011, with Mr. Justice Wilkie presiding over the court. The prosecution opened their case by saying, "On this day, an entirely innocent and quite ordinary diversion to a station cafe to buy some chips with some school friends was a decision that was to cost Millie her life because it meant her taking a fateful journey along Station Avenue." The trial lasted 6 weeks before a verdict was read. On June 23, 2011, Levi Belfield was found guilty of Millie's abduction and murder. He was handed a second life sentence, all white, feigning innocence. A year later, however, he admitted to the crime. Disgustingly, Levi requested he speak with female officers to tell them all the details of what he did that day. The following statement was published by Millie's family following Levi's confession. "We feel we need to say something in addition to the information that has already been made public, as we do not think what has been revealed reflects the true heinousness of this man," it read. In May 2015, nearly 9 months ago, we were informed that Belfield had requested to speak to Surrey police about Millie. Belfield made it clear to police that he would only speak to female police officers. Belfield provided the officers with a harrowing account of Millie's final 14 hours. Giving details of her abduction, the statement ended, "We believe that they should know what Belfield did to our beautiful daughter and sister, Millie." There are no words to describe the sheer depravity shown by Levi Belfield during these horrific murders and attacks. He is a man who lacks empathy for others. Instead, he has an innate desire to maim and kill. Had he not been brought to justice, more women would have died. There is no doubt about that. Now, in his 50s, Levi will die behind bars where he belongs.